Hello, my name is Dale Owen, and I'm a driver's trainer for the Baldwin County School System. The purpose of this video is to show you how to properly pre-trip your school bus for the state exam. For this demo, I'll be using a 2015 International. Before you inspect your bus, make sure that your wheel is chalked and you have secured your keys. All right. So let's start at the front of the bus. First thing we want to do is check under the bus to make sure there are no leaks and nothing hanging down. Then we want to check all the plastic lenses on the front of our bus. Make sure that none of them are cracked. When we've done that, we want to check our school bus reflector, make sure it is intact, present, and in good shape. We want to check our windshield to make sure it's not cracked or damaged and that we'll be able to see through it properly when we're driving. Then want to walk around to the side of the bus and check our mirrors. The top mirror is your side mirror or flat mirror. We also have a convex mirror. We're checking the lenses to make sure that they're not cracked. Also, we're checking our mirror mount to make sure it's nice and tight. We're going to pull our hood latch because we'll be looking under the hood in just a few moments. Also pull on our mirror mount for our crossover mirror. Make sure the lens looks good there. As we're walking around the front of the bus, we want to pull our crossing arm and make sure that we've got range of motion, that it comes out properly and goes back in properly. All right. And then we will also check our boot. It's a rubber boot, which is right there. We want to make sure it's not cracked or damaged. Once again, on this side, we're going to check our mirror mount and our crossover mirror. Make sure that it's in good shape, no cracks. Go ahead and pull our hood latch on this side. And then before we forget it, let's go ahead and check the mirror mount and the flattened side mirror and the convex mirror to make sure that there's no cracks or damages in those. Now we'll go ahead and open up the hood. Now under the hood, we want to make sure we start high and work our way low. That way we don't forget anything. Before we go in under the hood, let's go ahead and check our windshield wiper arm here and also our windshield wiper blades and make sure we've got good tread on those and they do look good. Now we'll start with our wiring system here. We're just checking for frays or any damage. We don't see any. Then we start doing an overview of the engine. We want to check all our clamps and our hoses to make sure everything looks good, that there's no leaks. And then we want to start checking our fluids. Now for the inspector, you will not actually check the fluids, but you will tell him this, that this is your transmission fluid. You can see by the red handle. We check transmission fluid when the engine is running and hot. This is our oil. We check our oil when the engine is cold and not running. We have our coolant. We want to check the appropriate level of the coolant, make sure it's good. And the same thing with our power steering fluid. There's a reservoir there. We want to make sure the fluid level is good there. Now there are 3 systems that we'll be going through in this video under the hood. The first system is your steering system. That's where you'll find your steering linkage. You can see it links on both ends there. We also have our steering box. Okay, make sure it's intact. And then we also have our power steering hoses that are connected to the box as well as to the reservoir. We also have our suspension system, and there's a nice acronym called SUMS, S-U-M-S. There are 4 parts to look for in the suspension system. The first part is going to be your leaf spring. The spring is the first thing in SUMS. So we're checking to make sure it's not cracked or damaged. We also have our U-bolts. There they are. We're making sure that they have properly clamped down the leaf spring and they look like they're in place, and they do. That's your U-bolt. We have our mounts on either end. This is the mount that connects the leaf spring on this side, and then of course on the back side, it's down there on the other end. We're making sure that bolt is nice and tight. The last S in SUMS is for your shock absorber. So of course you would identify where your shock absorber is, make sure it's attached to the frame and also attached at the bottom, okay? All right, that's our 4 parts of the suspension system. Now we're looking at the final system underneath the hood of this bus, and it is your brake system. There are 5 parts to this. First part would be your brake chamber. Okay, making sure it's attached properly. It looks good. We've got our brake line that comes out here and goes all the way into the frame there. We're just checking to make sure we don't see any leaks, and it looks like it's properly attached. We also have our slack adjuster, which is right here, making sure that it looks intact, and we can have no more than 1 inch of slack in the slack adjuster. Now it's connected to the push rod, which is this U-shaped piece of metal, the push rod connected to the slack adjuster. Then we have what's called the brake drum lining. You can see it right there. It looks like a brake cover on the back of the wheel. We're making sure that that's in place and not cracked. One final thing to look for under the hood would be this belt. We want to make sure that we have no more than 3/4 inch slack on this belt. All right, with that said, we'll go ahead and put the hood down. We'll make sure that the hood straps are connected. On both sides, just like so. All right, very good. So that's the hood. Now we want to check our front tire. There's an acronym for the front tire, or for tires on a school bus. That's ICD. That's I for inflation, C for condition, and D for depth. So let's go through the ICD. Our inflation, we want to check by either hitting the side of the tire with our fist or perhaps our foot. We want to make sure it's got good bounce, but we also want to check with a approved tire gauge our pressure on the tire to make sure that it's at right levels. The condition, that's about your sidewall. How does it look? Is it rotting? Is it cracked? Is it bubbling? Or is it in good shape? And then the D stands for depth for ICD, and the depth here on the front of this tire needs to be at least 4/32 of inch of depth. No less than that, okay? And we just checked that. We cannot have recaps or retreads on the front tire. Now we go to the center of the tire and we're looking at our rim, make sure there's no cracks or damage. Also our brake drum, make sure there's no cracks or damage in that as well. And then we also have our lug nuts. There's 2 things we look for on that. We're looking for rust, and we're also looking for any separation, like they look like they're coming off. And then also we have our hub oil seal. Make sure that seal is nice and tight and it's not leaking. All right, that is the front tire. Next, we'll go down the side of the bus, and there's 3 things that we're supposed to look for on the side of the bus for your exam. First thing is the battery box. We want to open it up and make sure that we have batteries. We also want to make sure up here where our posts are that they are connected and there is no corrosion. Then we want to look up at our stop sign. We want to check the lens covers on the stop sign, make sure they're not cracked, but also want to make sure that our wonderful reflector there is very apparent and operational. We'll open it up and check our lenses and reflector on the rear as well to make sure everything looks proper. And then we have 3 other things to look at. We've got the wiring that we need to make sure is not frayed and is intact. Also our cable, is it frayed or is it in good shape? And then our boot. This is very similar to the boot that was up there with the crossing arm. This boot is rubber. We want to make sure it is solid, make sure there's no cracks in it that would allow air to escape. And now we'll look down the side of our bus and we're checking for the reflectors, okay? We've got this reflector tape, you can see it right here going all the way down the bus. We want to make sure it is going all the way down, it's in good shape, as well as these circular reflectors. There are 3 of them that you can see down the side of the bus, like that. And then we also want to make sure that around the emergency exits, that we do have the reflector tape around them as well. All right, very good. Now we're ready to look underneath the bus. Okay, we are underneath the bus, and there is a wonderful acronym that's called FEDS. That's F-E-D-S, that will help us to identify the things that we need to speak about on our exam with the inspector. So the F in FEDS is for frame. All right, there's our frame. It goes all the way around the bus. We want to make sure it's not cracked or damaged. Looks like it's in pretty good shape. Then our E in FEDS is for our exhaust system. You can see the canisters right there, and you can see the pipe coming out of the back going towards, I guess, going higher. And then you can follow the pipe for the exhaust going all the way back to our rear bumper in the back of the bus. We want to make sure there's no leaks in our exhaust system. And then also the D in FEDS is for this drive shaft. You'll notice there are multiple parts to the drive shaft. It's connected in various places. We just want to make sure that all those connections are in place. And then the S in FEDS is for our safety loops. You can see the hangers there. Those are there in case the drive shaft breaks off and hits the ground. They'll catch it before it does hit the ground, our safety loops. While we're under here, we also want to check the spacing in between our duals to make sure there's nothing like debris that's in between these tires that would cause a fire. We also want to check our brake system while we're here. Yes, the rear has a brake system as well. There's your brake chamber. It looks a little different than it did on the front. We want to make sure that's intact, and you can see the brake lines that are coming out of the brake chamber there. Make sure they are connected properly. And then we also have our slack adjuster. I can see it on the other side there. It's behind the brake chamber on the other side. You want to make sure your slack adjuster and also your push rod are intact. Remember, no more than 1 inch of slack with your slack adjuster. And then also you can see on the back of that tire back there, maybe not so good with this video, but you can see the brake drum lining that's on the inside of your wheel like we saw up on the front tire. If I were to go back a little bit further here, you would be able to see it on this tire right here. See that? So once we're done underneath the bus, we'll talk about our rear tire. And there's a lot of this that's similar to what we talked about on the front tire, but we do have to do the front and the rear tires. I would highly recommend that you talk about the system that's behind the tire first, or you may forget it. So this is, once again, our suspension system. And you can see that the sums is clearly represented here, the S-U-M-S. On that, you see the spring, which is the S in sums, right there. We also have our U-bolt, which is right there. It's a singular U-bolt back there that's holding the spring together. And then the M in sums, there's your mount. We have the spring on the back here too, and also that U-bolt right there. And then also, of course, the mount right there as well. And then underneath the bus, we can see those shock absorbers. See them right there? We're making sure they're attached top and bottom. All right, we got the suspension out of the way. And now we're gonna get back to our tire. Remember the acronym, it's ICD. The I stands for inflation. So we're going to hit the tire or kick it to make sure that we've got bounce. And then we're also going to check, you know, with an approved tire gauge, the air pressure to make sure it's where it needs to be. The C in ICD is the condition of the sidewall. Make sure that there's no dry rot, bubbles, any cracks. Looks like it's okay. And then also our depth. So we want to have no less than 2/30 seconds on the rear. And yes, we can have recaps or retreads on the back tires on a school bus. Now, the middle of the tire here, this is our rim. Want to make sure our rim is not cracked or damaged. We also can see our brake drum through there, make sure it's not cracked or damaged. Then we also have our axle seal. In the front, it was a hub oil seal. On the back, because there's an axle going through these tires, it's called an axle seal. Want to make sure it's not leaking here on the rear of the tire. We also have our lug nuts back here. You want to make sure that there's no rust and make sure that there's no separation and that there is complete tightness on those lug nuts. Okay. Also on the rear, you do not see one here, but there could be a splash guard right here. Some people call it a mud flap. There's not one on this bus, but you would need to tell the inspector that if there was one, that you would check to make sure it's in its appropriate place and is attached properly. Now, that's it as far as the side of this bus. Now we're at the rear of the bus, and we will once again, like we did on the front of the bus, check all the plastic lenses to make sure that there are no cracks or damages. We also want to check our reflector. See the school bus reflector like it was on the front of the bus? Well, we also have it around the door, and we have it at the sides. So we want to make sure that all of that is in place and not coming off. We also want to make sure that our emergency door works properly. So we're going to open and make sure it locks into place, and it does. We want to check the seal around this door and around the windows to make sure that it is sealed properly, because we have the exhaust back here and we don't want any exhaust getting through to the children in the cab. So we're checking the seals also outside here on the windows to make sure that they're all in place, and they are. While we've got this door open, we'll check the tread down this aisle and make sure there's nothing they can trip on, and also under the seats to make sure everything looks safe under there. So now we're going to close our emergency door. We're going to also check our exhaust pipe, which is right here. We want to make sure that the exhaust pipe is either even with the bumper or extended from the bumper. It can't be inside of the bumper, because fumes would go through the floor and where the kids are. All right, that is the back of the bus. So when you get around here, ask the inspector, do you want me to check anything on this side of the bus like I checked on the other side, or do you want me just to check the differences? If he says the differences, that means you did a great job on that other side, so you don't have to repeat anything over here. So for the purpose of this video, I'll just go over the differences on this side. So obviously we did not have a fuel loading area on the other side of the bus, so we'll check this. Want to make sure the cap is tight. Also want to make sure that there's no fuel leaking through the fuel cage onto the ground. We also want to check our storage. Make sure this compartment is nice and closed. You don't want it coming open when you're driving down the road. There's our emergency triangles. They're in that red box. There should be 3 of those. So they're located back here. We also have some cleaning supplies, and also the chalk we use for the wheel is here in the storage box when it's not in use. We also have our no trespassing sign. That's clearly marked. We need to mention that. We also have our depth fluid. This is a diesel environmental fluid that cleans the diesel fuel as we burn it driving the bus. This is going to be locked because they have a special person that comes out and fills it up, so we don't have to. But we want to check to make sure there's no leaks underneath the bus from that area. We also have our exterior stepwell light. This lights up when the kids are coming on or off the bus. We want to make sure there's no cracks or damages in that. We also have our door that we want to make sure will close properly, and that the seal works good on that. There's no cracks or damages on the glass, and that it will open properly, that it's got range of motion. And then we also want to check here our handrail, make sure it's tight. Our interior stepwell light, make sure it's not cracked or damaged. We also want to check our stepwell to make sure that there's no trip hazards there. Okay, so at this point, we're at the top of the bus. So this will be the next step in our pre-trip, and that is to identify the circle of life, which is basically the safety gear that this bus has installed. So we look up first to see our first aid kit. We also have our body fluid cleanup kit. We also have our fire extinguishers, which should be in the safe area in the green zone there. You would check that to make sure that it is charged properly. We also have our seatbelt cutter, which is right there. If we were to roll the bus or have an issue not being able to get out of our seatbelt, that would be something we could use that would cut the seatbelt. We also would have our emergency triangles. which could be right there on a lot of buses, but it's actually in the storage unit that we just looked at. So we've already checked those. And grab our key. And we want to go ahead and turn the key in the on position. We don't want to crank it up yet. We just want to put it in the on position. Then we will check another safety feature here, and that is our seat belt. Make sure it connects properly and it's tight, and it is. And go ahead and release that. And then we want to go ahead and check a couple of other things. For instance, this steering wheel, we want to make sure that we have no more than 2 inches of slack in the wheel. We want to check our horn, make sure it works. And we also want to check our windshield wipers, make sure they work as well. With all that said, we'll go ahead and crank the bus. Once we've got it cranked, we're going to actually look this way and check some of the safety features, some of the escape hatches and windows and door that we have on this bus. Before we do that though, we want to make sure that we turn on our dome lights and also our strobe light to make sure that those are ready for us as we go to the back. You'll see that the dome light is up here, that's on, and that's the driver's dome. But we also have our domes in the cab area here in the student section that are all lit up. All right. At this point, we'll ask the inspector, do you want me to check every single window and roof and door exit? Or do you want me to just check one of a kind, which means one window, one roof, one door? He'll say one of a kind. So that's what we'll do for the purpose of this video. And as we're heading back, check your seats to make sure they are nice and stable. Want to make sure that these seats are in good shape. All right, so we're going to go ahead and check this first window, make sure it opens, and it does. Make sure we're able to close it properly, and we can. We'll keep pulling on these seats as we go back, make sure they're all stable. Then we're going to get back to the second roof hatch, the one in the rear. What he's going to want us to do is make sure that we have an alarm, and we do. Make sure that we can physically open it, but also, you see that strobe? Our strobe light is working, so that's great. So we'll go ahead and pull this back down. We'll continue to check these seats as we go back. And then we have our rear door exit. We want to make sure the alarm works and that the door will open. It does. Now on the way back, we'll check the bottom part of our seats to make sure they are stable as well. So you would do this with each and every seat as you walk back up towards the bus. Now, we're going to physically get behind the wheel now. Okay, for the purpose of brevity, I went ahead and put my seatbelt on. Always do that when you get behind the wheel of a bus. First thing we want to do when we get behind the wheel is we want to check our instruments. So I want to make sure I go ahead and turn the strobe light back off and those dome lights back off. The inspector is going to want you to check your heaters to make sure all your heaters come on properly, and also your fan. Your fan right there. So I've turned them all on. Now I can turn them all off. I do need to point out these buttons right here because these buttons are your air, your heat, and also your temperature controls. Want to make sure that you're able to adjust everything properly. Now we move to the center portion here, and we want to make sure we check our gauges. So I'm going to get some close-ups of these so it looks a little better. But we have our depth fluid here. Want to make sure that we have plenty of depth fluid. We also want to make sure our water temperature is rising. It is. We also have our oil pressure, and it is rising. On the other section here, we've got our battery voltage. We want to make sure the battery voltage is at least at 14. And then we have our air tank gauges, which is right here. There's our two gauges. We want to make sure that we're at 120, which is a full tank of air before we actually move with the bus. Another thing we want to point out here before we end our pre-trip is we want to check our left, right, and also our hazards to make sure that they all work and that we can see that they're working with our dashboard here. So the left turn signal, there it is. It is working. Right turn signal is working. And then right here, our hazards are right behind the wheel. Push those down, and we have hazards as well. So we're good. So that would complete our pre-trip of the bus as needed for the requirements of the state exam. What we'll do next is our air brake check.